Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, and we are live for the view from the top. We have got an amazing show for you today. 2 weeks ago, it was Valentine's Day, and we did a show on love and the expat, and we told stories of people who got married or met whilst on assignment, and all the issues concerning that, the immigration issues, the tax issues, the personal stories. Today, sadly, we're going to be talking about the other side of the coin. We're going to be talking about what happens when things go wrong in a personal relationship whilst you're on assignment. Today's subject is divorce and the expat. It's a hugely important subject, and as far as I'm aware, not many people have actually talked about this subject. I've not seen much in the global mobility community about subjects where people are talking about it. So this is a really, really important subject. So you know how it works, everybody. Join in the conversation, write in the comments box, tell us who you are, where you are, tell us what's going on in your world as we talk about this really, really important subject. We've got a huge number of people out in our audience. I can already see over 175 people watching us live. So we really ought to get into this super important subject. I can see Harvey's in the audience. Hi to Harvey, it's coming in from a rainy Swindon. By the way, if you want to get your credits, we're offering credits from Worldwide ERC. You can get your CPE credits. You can get your credits from HRCI. You can get your credits from SHRM. Oh God, people are coming in from all over the world. I see Michael Cadden's coming in. Many congratulations to you, Michael, on your recent engagement. We've got Jessica Cousins coming in. People coming in from all over the world, which is just fantastic. So a really, really important subject today. Next week, we've got another important show. Next week, we're going to be talking about global mobility superpowers. We're going to be talking about how artificial intelligence can radically transform the way that you do your job. We've got one of the leading thought leaders in our industry. We've got Arjun Jonagalander from Baker Hughes, who's going to be talking about how AI is or could impact his work. And we've got Beneva's very own Russ Haney talking about how he has saved, I think, 250 hours of work in just 9 months through using AI. So a really important subject. If you're not familiar with AI, then please do join us. So people coming in from all over the world, which is just wonderful. But we've got so much to talk about. What I really want to do is to get straight into the show. So the first thing, as ever, what I want to do is just share a little bit of breaking news. What's been going on in our industry over the last 7 days? Let's have a look. Now, I cannot believe how many people have tuned into this week's episode. We have got over 300 people watching us live as we're talking about this really important subject of divorce and the expat. Why is it so important? Well, let's just take a scenario into account. Let's just take if you like, a traditional expat family going on assignment. We've got husband, wife, and maybe they've got a young son. Let's say it's a 2-year-old son, and they've gone abroad from, say, somewhere in Europe to somewhere in the USA. Whilst they're abroad, maybe they have another child. So maybe they have a baby daughter. So we've now got a family of 4. And at that point, they decide to sadly split up. What are the implications for the mother, for the father, for the one child who might be a dual national and for the second child that might be a sole national? What are the implications? What are the tax implications? What are the immigration implications? What are the financial implications? What are the legal implications? Who has jurisdiction? Can the family go home? Can the family stay? These are so many important issues. We're going to get into them. But as ever, we're going to start with immigration. So I'm super delighted to welcome onto our stage today the wonderful, the legendary Julia Onslow Cole.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, where in the world are you today? I know every week is a country.
I'm in Riyadh today, actually. Yes, I'm in Riyadh. I came in from Qatar this morning.
So well, everybody, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button to Julia, who is traveling around the world and is just now in a hotel in Riyadh, having just flown in and has made time for us. Julia, the screen is lighting up with thanks for you for doing this week in, week out. But tell us a bit about the immigration, the visa implications of divorce and the expat.
Yes, thank you, Brian. This is such an important topic, and I just want to say thank you so much to Charlotte Wills from Fragaman, because she's really helped me, highlight a lot of the really important points. And obviously, when you are in this situation and you're having to give advice, you have to be obviously so empathetic and understanding, because it is a very emotionally charged situation. But moreover, you need to give people very clear and practical advice. So in situations where you go on assignment and unfortunately a couple separates, the two big questions are, at what point, from an immigration perspective, at what point do you have to notify the authorities? So that's the first big question. Do you legally have to notify them when the relationship's broken down, or when one party's filed for divorce? And that's really important, the notification part. And it's very important to be really accurate when you give advice and know what the local practice is and what the law is, because then obviously you need to know very carefully what are the consequences of that notification once you've made that notification. So, can you convert the person who is not the assignee to another visa category? What happens if they want to stay in the country because they want the children to finish schooling? And obviously, it's very different in each country, but in some countries, it's really quite strict. One of the cases I wanted to highlight in the last few weeks was a case in South Africa in which the court said it was unconstitutional for the Immigration Act to force a spouse to leave, or an unmarried partner to leave, if there was a divorce or there was separation, if the spouse is married to a South African and they have a child who's either South African or has permanent residence. And the court said this person should be given a change in status and actually allowed to continue working. And this decision actually can be challenged, but it really shows how difficult these cases are and how they go to the highest courts in the countries. Also, the other thing to say is it can get very difficult if someone divorces or separates just before an assignment. So when they're just about to go, because then there's a whole big issue about, who has custody of the children. Are the children going on assignment? And if they are, that can be very difficult from an immigration perspective if they're going with one parent. So, we're very lucky today to have, people on the show to talk about the family law aspects of this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing that. But these are very difficult things. And I finally wanted to,
Julia, just before we get on to that final point, I'd like to also ask the audience, in practice, do you ask your assignees who are moving what their marital circumstances are and just alert them to what the issues might be if they're moving and maybe they're divorced? Is that a question that is even asked by global mobility professionals? So that's a question for the audience. I'll be interested to get your comments in the comments box, and we'll pick up on that as we go through later on. But Julia, do continue. I know you're going to move on to a different area.
I just wanted to end by saying something about pets, because I think everybody that has a pet can say that a pet is as important as important family member. And there's been a lot in the press about this, but there's a huge crisis around assignees and pets. And that's because many companies, and particularly the military, have very limited budgets as to what you can spend to actually take a pet from one country to another. I think the military is about $2,000 per pet. And prices for transporting pets in cargo have increased by up to 400%.
Wow.
This case that actually had a lot of publicity very recently of a lady called Stephanie, and she was a British citizen and a military spouse, and she had unfortunately separated from her husband and was returning from Florida with her children. And she had a little dog called Toby, who the children absolutely adored. And what happens with pets is that you actually ask for a quote for the shipping, and then you can't actually confirm that quote until actually right near the time. So you can be in for a big shock. So Stephanie was quoted $2,600 to move Toby to London. And then because of the increase, she thought she's actually facing a bill, and she hasn't locked in her return date, of $20,000, which means that she'd have to leave him in Florida and the children would be devastated. So, I mean, it's really very difficult. And she was making the point as well that on military assignments, that's particularly difficult, even if there wasn't a divorce and you wanted to take your pet with you, because you could be deployed in a 12-week period. And actually then your spouse might be going to a conflict zone, and the pet is even more important, a part of the family. So I thought that was, quite an interesting point, and shouldn't be forgotten in the whole debate about, families and keeping families together. I've just seen some really good comments coming in about your question, Brian, because I did actually think it might be a bit too personal to be asking assignees those types of question, but it's interesting getting the feedback.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that more with Yael and Lara, our family law experts, in a bit. But it is interesting because it's a very personal question to ask, but you do have to give full advice, deep dive into what is a very personal matter, not just what is your marital status, but what is your marital status likely to be.
Yes.
Which is a very hard question.
And just to quick clarify, because says Diane's very helpfully put some things in the I just wanted to say that what I was saying is I understood that the military had an allowance of $2,000 per pet. I'm not sure if that's right. That's what the media said. And then what it was, the actual quote was 20,000, or the person Stephanie thought it would be 20,000. But we're so lucky to have such lively audience and so much expertise and comments. So thank you.
We're going to move on. These numbers are going crazy today. We're up to about 400 people watching us live. So we're going to move on. We're now going to move on to talk about the tax aspects of immigration. The tax aspects of divorce and the expat. So everybody, you know what to do. We're going to say goodbye to Julie Onslow-Cole. We're going to welcome onto the stage Julie Barron from Vialto Partners. So like you've never done it before, folks, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's say goodbye for this week to Julie Onslow-Cole and welcome to Julie Barron. Julie,
Hi,
welcome.
Brian. How are you?
I'm really good, really excited for today's show. So, Julie, tell us a bit about expat tax and divorce.
Well, there's so many things to do with tax and divorce, and a lot of things on the domestic front, but also a lot of things that you have to consider for your expats. And when Julia asked, do people ask whether you ask your assignees whether they're married or not, you need to know that to consider their hypothetical tax and their allowances and all kinds of things. So, if you have someone who gets divorced on assignment, maybe that needs to be adjusted. And do you pay for two homes while, let's say, the children finish the school year, but you're not living together? And there's so many things that a divorce for your expat could cost you just in the allowance front. But on the tax front, there's so many different things. If you do get divorced, and it's often interesting, and you've been seeing more of this, is maybe you didn't technically get married, but you've been living together for some time and accumulated assets. So it's not just technically people who get divorced, but people who separate from long term relationships can have similar type issues. First of all, if you live in a country like the US where you file together, then if you get divorced, you have to file separately. Brian, you asked me a question recently. If you have a non working spouse and you get divorced before the end of the year, that could cost you a lot of money in taxes. It's interesting here in the US, you don't have to be divorced to be considered single. If you're legally separated, you're actually considered single. Huge issues with alimony and child support. Is that a tax deduction? So if I'm an expat living in Switzerland, can I get a deduction for my alimony? And does my spouse?
It might be a tax deduction in one jurisdiction, but not in another.
Not in the other, exactly. So I did look it up, in Switzerland, Canada, Malaysia all have deductions for alimony, but then that becomes taxable to the ex-spouse, of course, because you've got to even those out, right? One person gets a deduction, one person gets income. And in those countries that allow that, it's usually a good tax play because the person having to pay the alimony is probably in a higher tax bracket than the person receiving the alimony. So overall, as a couple, as an ex-couple, you're paying less tax. So it's a good thing. The U.S. used to allow deduction for alimony, but that changed in 2018. So if you got divorced before 2018, you can still deduct it. Now you can't. So recent divorces are a problem. Sometimes countries allow deductions for child support, sometimes they don't. But one thing you really need to figure out with children and any dependent is, once you get divorced, who's going to claim any credits or deductions that your country might have for those children. We had a recent case actually just last week where someone asked us to file his tax return really quickly because he and his wife ex-wife hadn't formally agreed on who was going to claim the children, and they wanted to get it into the system first so he could claim them before she did. Because the system, the e-filing system, if that deduction has already been claimed, you don't get to take it. So basically, in their divorce agreement, whoever files first got the deduction. It's just kind of a crazy thing. The other thing, of course, is property division. So you have to divide up your property. And I was reading about, in the UK, they came out with a law last year that said you only have a certain amount of time where you have to divide up your assets before they're subject to capital gains tax, as if you were selling it to your ex spouse or ex partner. So you have now up to 3 years from the time you separate to divide up those assets before you might have a tax on that division of property. So you got to make sure things are done in a timely manner. But like I said, for our mobility community, you really have to decide, you know, do you make sure that your assignees know, hey, if you get divorced, you have to tell us, because they could fall into a different tax bracket that could cause you a lot of or cost you a lot of money. Do you adjust their allowances? Do you do all kinds of things like that? And Brian, like you said, in cross-border situations, if I'm living in Switzerland, can I deduct my alimony that I'm paying to someone who's living in the UK? And so you have to look at some of these treaties and all kinds of things like that to figure all those details out. So from a tax perspective, oh, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say, so not only is it a very traumatic time, it's also an incredibly complex time from a tax perspective, and indeed, as we just looked from an immigration perspective.
Yeah, so I would say to all of you, if you have an expat who's going through some kind of divorce, please tell them to reach out to their tax advisor, because you really need to get these things straight and make sure that you're not fighting over who gets the deduction for the kids and things like that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Julie. Very insightful. I know there's just so much to talk about. We could be doing a whole day on this subject, but we've only got the 60 minutes. So we're going to move on now. Thank you so much, Julie. We're going to bring on Matt Cheek from Benevo, just give you a quick Benevo update before we move into our main segment with our international family lawyers from Osbornes LLP. But let's bring on Matt first. Everybody hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. A big thank you to Julie Barron for so kindly giving us her time, and a welcome to the show to Matt Cheek. Hey, Matt.
Hello, Brian.
Where are you today?
How are you? I'm in Valencia, Spain.
Cool. Okay, Matt, give us a quick update.
I've got a couple things. So the first one is that I wanted to let the very impressive live community on this show today, over 400 people, it's very exciting, know that the Benevo Client Advisory Team, who is led by our colleagues Pankaj Bhatia and Russ Haney, have just launched a new international mobility benchmark survey. It is going to be a wide-ranging survey to help all of you corporate professionals benchmark yourselves. All participants in the survey will get a copy, and we are running it until March 8th. So if you have not yet seen that, you can see it now in the chat. Tally has just posted a link to where you can participate. The next thing I wanted to say is that if you are in Amsterdam at the FEM this week, please go meet us. My colleague Beth Nielsen is there. We have a Tech Connect event the day before the FEM, also one-to-ones at the session. And then over on the other side of the pond in the United States, we are going to be at the GME in Dallas. So we have a panel there of our advisor to the company, Eric Halverson, with our colleague Kara, who is going to be presenting on the high touch support needs meeting advanced tech. Kara has a deep background in DSP and joining that with the high tech services that, of course, Benevo offers. And we're also going to be doing a breakout session on season control, navigating proactive solutions in global mobility. And that agenda is up on the GME event page right now. So if you're going to be in Dallas, please come and see us.
Okay, so thank you so much, Matt. We're going to move on now to the family law implications of divorce and the expat. We're super delighted. We've got two leading international attorneys with us. We've got Yael Selig and Lara Myers from Osbornes Law. It's their first time on the show, everybody. So you know how it works as we bring them on stage. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's give them a good old-fashioned view from the top. Welcome to this week's episode of the show. Lara, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having us.
No pressure, but we've got 400 people watching us live. So let's start with introductions. Yael, tell us a bit about yourself and your international experience.
Sure. Okay, so hi from rainy London. I am a family law practitioner and a partner at Osbornes Law. I've got 30 years experience in family law. And although I'm based in London, I have a big client following in England and in Gibraltar. I speak fluent Spanish. I'm Gibraltarian myself, and I deal with all aspects of family law. And we often deal with lots of international jurisdictions, which, as you can imagine, requires us to act quickly and look at things from the outset, very interestingly, and looking at what is the most advantageous forum for our respective clients.
Okay, and Lara, I mean, I know you mentioned earlier you're a UK-US national, so tell us a bit about yourself and your experience.
Yeah, so I'm a family solicitor at Osbornes as well, mainly dealing with divorce, the financial issues that flow from a divorce, children issues, prenuptial agreements, and I'd say most of our cases have some kind of a international aspect to them. And I'm also a dual US citizen, being born in the US, whilst my dad was out there on assignment.
And you were saying earlier that you're also, you got the lived experience of this.
Yes.
Well.
My own parents separated, divorced whilst my father was on assignment. So I have actual personal experience of how this all can play out.
Okay, so a very interesting aspect there. So you got the international qualification or the international experience from life, but also from the work that you do. So let's just start off putting things in context. How common are cross-border divorces? Is this common or uncommon?
Well, it's increasingly becoming more and more common, Brian. As you can imagine now, people are moving around the world. People are taking jobs. There's, everywhere across the world. And what's really interesting about cross-border divorces is what I was saying before, is in which country should those parties divorce in? And that's when, you really have to look at when you're interviewing your client for the first time, which jurisdictions are relevant. Mm-hmm. And you need to take, action pretty quickly. So at the initial meeting, I would expect to be talking about where are you from, where's your partner from, and which jurisdictions can be relevant.
Exactly.
It's much more common than it used to be, cross-border divorces, we find in our, I mean, I've never had so many cases at the moment with an international element as I do. Most of them do at this moment.
I think it's now far more common for people to have assets all over the world, assets in Europe, assets in the Middle East. And that's just now far more common than it ever used to be.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so we talked about something earlier. When I was talking to Julia and Julie, we were talking about this question of when should you tell your employer? I mean, because it's obviously a very, very sensitive subject. You've separated, you're on assignment somewhere, you've separated, or you're talking about divorce, you might get divorced. Does your employer need to know? Should they know? When should you tell them?
I think it's dependent on the particular circumstances of the case, but I'd say in most situations, it's probably worth telling the employer sooner rather than later. It can be a very stressful process, could impact on your ability to perform. It's probably worth them knowing that. And it's also worth exploring if they can offer you any support.
And often we've realized some clients that we have, actually the employers offer benefits like a discounted legal fees. There's like rewards and remuneration packages within their workforce that they may take benefit from. But I do think it's quite a personal thing. Some people don't want to tell the employers. They find it's quite personal. I think it depends on the person.
Definitely.
Yeah, but there was an interesting comment coming in. I'll just pull up that comment from Merrily. She said, let's pull that one up again. She said the divorce agreement, I appreciate this jumping ahead of ourselves a bit, may require continuation of medical and dental for a set period, and the international plan may be seen to set up for an expat, for an ex-spouse. So, I mean, so there's things that an employer clearly needs to know.
Exactly. And things like visas expiring are all very important. Lara and I are actually working on a case together in Singapore. And that's, those are the things that we have to be, we've got to look at everything. You can't overlook anything. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, this is such a huge area. By the way, out in the audience, if you've got any questions or for Lara and Yael or any comments, please do feed them into the comments box and we'll try and take as many of your questions as possible. But let me just move on this question. So we've talked about how common a cross-border divorce is and when you tell your employer. But by definition, if you've got an expat divorce, you've got people who've got connections to two countries at minimum, correct, the home country and the host country. How do the rules vary in different countries? I mean, my understanding is divorce rules vary quite dramatically between one and another, but give us some examples.
Yeah, I mean, they can vary hugely from country to country. I don't know, looking at London, England, it's far more favourable to the financially weaker spouse. In other countries, definitely not the case.
Yeah, I mean, London is often looked at as the divorce capital of the world. it's generally the case, as Lara just said, that the financially weaker party does better in an English jurisdiction than, say, a European jurisdiction. And often people do look at, and they do forum shopping, where they look at which is the best jurisdiction, i.e. forum, for them to start and initiate proceedings in that particular country, which would be more beneficial for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll look at forum shopping and how you actually determine jurisdiction in a moment, but just sticking with different rules in different countries, I'm guessing that it's not just about the financial issues. One country might be more generous. It might also be about custody and speed and fault.
And speed, yeah. That's a really good point, Brian, because England is quite a quick jurisdiction. France, by contrast, can take longer. But also, a lot depends as well where the family, now that they've split up, whether, say, the mum and the children are going to remain living. Are they going to stay where they are? Are they going back to their hometown? So a lot depends on that. But where the children live is where the relevant court will kick into action in relation to the children. So even if the divorce is ongoing in another state, it could be that because the children have moved back to wherever they're from, that's the relevant country where the courts will look at relevant considerations in relation to the children.
But yeah, I mean, I think the most important takeaway from this is to get advice super quickly and to get advice from the various jurisdictions. I mean, we have connections. We have to have connections with lawyers all over the world so that we can pick up the phone and say, look, I've got a client. They have assets in Dubai, I don't know, wherever else. And where do you think it would be beneficial for them to issue a divorce? If they were to issue here, we think the outcome would broadly be X. Would it be particularly different where you guys are? And that's something we do on a regular basis.
And that's right. And we have got very good existing relationships with lawyers across the globe. And I think that's very beneficial because when you have a client that comes in, she's got the benefit of that I can pick up the phone to a lawyer in Paris, in Spain, wherever it is. And I think actually I found that the fact that I speak Spanish has helped with other jurisdictions as well, which has been really good.
Okay, I've got a question coming in from Cheryl Obal. She said this: can I ask how the ruling from the divorce gets enforced when both partners live in different countries? I mean, if one partner owes the other one money, do you have to pay them out in order for the divorce to be finalised, or can you agree on the division of assets, finalise the divorce, and then pay later?
Well, I think once the jurisdiction has been agreed in a relevant country, then that court will issue an order, or an agreed order will take place. So the parties have to adhere to that because there'll be an order from a relevant court, and they would have had that fight in advance.
And I mean, with enforcement, you might have to start looking at reciprocal legislation between various countries to check that you can enforce the order if they've suddenly, I don't know, run off to somewhere. In the hope they don't have to pay whatever it is they were meant to their ex-wife.
But I think that the sort of dispute about which jurisdiction is relevant has already been established because you would have had an order from a relevant court. It's whether, like you've just said, if they run away to another country, can they enforce that in that particular country?
We'll get on to jurisdiction in a moment. But one final point, whilst we're just talking about how the rules vary, I know as a rule of thumb, I always learned there's a rule of thumb, the starting point is assets get shared 50-50. But in certain jurisdictions, it's a question of 50-50 of what? How big is the pot? Do you look at, tell us a bit about how you determine the pot and how that might vary from country to country.
Well, that's a really good point because what represents a marital pot depends on the laws of the particular country. So whilst in England, certain things would be allowed in other jurisdictions, premarital assets or, inheritance are completely ring-fenced automatically. Whilst in England, it's not per se.
It's discretionary, whereas I think other countries, it would be completely thought of as separate property, non-included.
Yeah, and in Europe as well, prenups are almost the go-to. Whilst in England, although they're becoming much more popular, it's not as automatic as in other European countries.
And in the States, I know it varies state by state. Can you just say a bit about community property and non-community property?
Yeah, so I mean, in obviously America varies from state to state. I think that I know in California, they look at what's been built up during the marriage and there's looked at equal sharing. I think in New York, it's different in that there's more discretion as to how the courts can distribute and divide up assets. So it does really vary, and you go and need to get advice pretty quickly as to which state would be the best one for you to go ahead and get a divorce in, so that particular set of laws are applicable to you.
And I think that's the thing. The sooner they get advice, the minute they know that unfortunately the marriage has come to an end, the sooner they get advice from the relevant country, the better, because they can make decisions knowing in the knowledge of what is likely to happen if they proceeded in a particular jurisdiction.
Something else that can vary massively from country to country is spousal maintenance. So that's one party paying the other monthly payments for however long. Some countries would cap that at, say, 2 or 3 years. Other countries would say it could be open-ended, and that can make a real difference to the financial outcome of the case.
Yeah, and also in that particular jurisdiction, they may not take into account pensions, and then in the other one they do. So I think you need to have a complete advice and opinion on the overall financial settlement at all aspects, maintenance, capital, pensions, everything, so that what the bottom line is in the particular country.
Yeah, plus you're liaising with your tax lawyers and your immigration lawyer at the same time. And you'd hope that the divorce lawyer, the tax lawyer, and the immigration lawyer all work together.
Yeah, which we do. I mean, we do that.
Let me move the conversation on, because there is so much to talk about. I want to get into this question of jurisdiction. I remember a situation, a few years ago. It was a French investment banker working, in this case, in London, and he got wind of the fact that his wife was about to file for divorce. So he was advised to quickly go to Paris and file in Paris to make sure he beat her to jurisdiction. Now, I don't know how it works, because I know I come from a tax background. You have tiebreaker clauses and stuff like that. But with family law, what's the general rule? How do you work out what jurisdiction takes precedence?
Well, first of all, you have to do it quickly. That's why you act quickly. So you try and get it in past as quickly as possible. However, since Brexit, the sort of jurisdiction race doesn't really apply anymore. But I've got a very similar case at the moment.
But it would be for French and German, for example.
Yeah, so I'm dealing at the moment with a French case with England. And although the French divorce came in first, we are still issuing an application in England, because we're saying this is not the most convenient forum. Yes, you raced and you went to France, but actually the parties live here. They work here, their marital home is here. So we're saying, there's a jurisdiction dispute and it needs to be adjudicated. And we're trying to do that in England.
So the first thing
sorry, Brian. So even though he ran first, we're saying makes no difference. Okay.
I'm presuming all this gets expensive too. But I mean, if you've got the traditional scenario of, let's say, an expat from, say a European national working in, say, whatever, New York, they've then got to work out pretty quickly which country is going to have jurisdiction. And is there a choice in this? I mean, if you're the spouse that's filing and you've got connections to both locations, can you then sort of argue it, or is it sort of a set of facts that says, well, if these are the facts, you're in country A, if they're not, they're country B? Or how grey is it?
You could be able, it could well be the case that you could issue in both. Generally speaking, you need to have lived in the country you're issuing in for a minimum period of time. In England, for example, it's 12 months. It can vary from country to country, but there's usually a minimum requirement of you living there. And so you could choose, and that's when...
that's precise. There's a test in each country as to whether you can divorce in that applicable jurisdiction. So we have our own test here.
Yeah.
And every other country will have their own tests, which is why we liaise with foreign lawyers from the outset, because they might say, oh, you think that they've got a link and a connection with France, but actually they haven't lived here, they don't have any assets here, and there's no connection. So parties need to be appraised very quickly as to which can be a relevant jurisdiction, then make a choice.
Yeah, and I think someone asked earlier, does it matter what country you got married in? Is that relevant? It's not relevant.
It's not relevant
at all.
No.
You could get married in Vegas, but yet you have absolutely no connection to Vegas, and you couldn't possibly get divorced there.
And people often do. They have destination weddings. That doesn't mean that because they had a destination wedding abroad in a beautiful country, that's the country that's applicable for divorce. In fact, it wouldn't be.
Okay, so that's an important point. So the country you get married in is no relevance whatsoever. But the sorts of things that are relevant are your your residence, your domicile.
Yeah.
Where the assets are held.
And there are all the factors a court will look at. If there is a dispute and two parties are saying, well, I think it should be here, the other one saying, I think it should be here, the court will look at those factors. Where are the assets? Where are the parties from? Where are they domiciled? Where are they living? Where are the children living? And it can get quite messy.
It's messy. And the worst thing, Brian, which you identified before, is the expense. Jurisdiction disputes are very costly. So in a situation, I've got another case at the moment where the parties have said to themselves, let's sit down around the table and let's try and agree a settlement. So, you know, on the basis that England is going to give me this and France would give me that, let's just find a middle way and avoid incurring all of the expenses of the lawyer. So we have to be practical.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost use it.
Let me move on. I'm just going to, there's so much to talk about. I'm going to move the conversation on. We've talked a bit about jurisdiction, but let's just move away from financial stuff and let's talk about the spouse and the kids. What are the implications of an expat divorce on the spouse and the children?
Okay, so obviously it depends what's going to happen. I mean, if they all live in the same country and they want to stay in the same country, then that's okay. But if, let's just say, without being gender specific, but the wife wants to go back to where she's from and doesn't want to go back to London because of schooling issues, because they prefer that, then obviously she needs to have the permission of the other spouse, because you cannot just leave a jurisdiction without permission. She needs to either have the consent of the father or have
Presumably you can, it's just you can't take the kids.
Well, yes, no, you can't take the kids. It would be, it's a criminal offense, even if you do it inadvertently. So, you know, people don't realize that. Mm-hmm. But you need to have the written consent.
It's really important to bear that in mind. I think someone's asked, should there be any training used to help employees be prepared for this? Well, I think they should be made aware that actually they couldn't just pick up and leave and take the kids without the other parent agreeing for that to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I want to get into that because this is something that people don't know. And even seasoned practitioners I was talking to were quite shocked by this. It is, as I understand it, pretty much everywhere in the world, it is a criminal offence, and presumably quite a serious criminal offence, to get on a plane with a child without the permission of both parents. And you were saying to me earlier, Yael, when you travel, you take your kid's birth certificate and your marriage certificate. Tell me a bit about this.
I'll tell you about that. So my passport is in my maiden name, and my children's names are my married name. So obviously when I travel alone with my 3 boys, they don't have my surname. So that raises, you know, child abduction questions. So I've always traveled with their birth certificates and my marriage certificate to show the names of their father and the fact that it's the family name, surname. But I have been stopped. I mean, it is a thing. It's best to travel with those documents.
Definitely worth doing.
I'd love to ask the audience, do any of you, when you're traveling alone with your kids, i.e. without your partner or spouse, do you take with you some form of proof, maybe proof that you've got their permission to go, or proof that you are actually the parent of the child, especially if you've got a different surname? Interesting to see what people's experience has been. I know a lot of people say they've done it loads, they've never been stopped, but that doesn't mean you can't be stopped. But also, what about the situation then? Let's just go into it. When you've got a family that's split up, and let's say they're on assignment in the United States, they've split up, and the spouse, actually, Abdul said this. I did have an issue recently when traveling to the other country with my daughter. Abdul, if you're willing to share, I'd love to hear a bit more about exactly what the issue was.
And what country?
And whether there's a lot of comments coming. Let's pull up some of these comments from Chloe. Absolutely, and even more after divorce. And then I think we had a comment from Irene. She said, Irene, yes, always a written consent to travel alone with my child. So she always does. And I think Karen had a comment. Yeah, most parents traveling alone with children need to carry a notarized or authenticated letter granting permission from the other parent. Other documents, birth certificates, etc., also helpful. This is wise advice.
Correct.
But question to global mobility professionals: how often do you tell this to your assignees and let them know? Monica says she's never been traveled. Verna says yes, always. Monica says I travel frequently with my daughter from US to Poland. I lost that one. Lauren said, same surname, but travel often with my girls without my husband. Never thought of that. I should reconsider my docs when traveling. Yes, Lauren,
Yes,
please
Lauren.
do.
Do
Absolutely.
so.
Hopefully we've got one learning out of today, nothing else. But I mean, this is a huge issue because I just want to go back to the case study, like I was talking about. So we've got a situation where the spouse wants to go back home to the matrimonial home where the parents are, take the kids home and wants to get on the plane. But the husband, who is your expat, doesn't want them to leave the country because he wants his custody, his visitation rights. What happens then? How do you contest it? I mean, what would be the implications if, in this case, the wife just got on a plane and took the kids?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I mean, if she got on a plane and took the kids, say she was going back to the UK, that would actually be quite simple in terms of the father trying to get them back.
Yeah.
Many countries, about 100 countries, are signed up to something called the Hague Convention, which provides for the speedy return of children that have been abducted. And basically the authorities work together and they make sure that child gets back.
And they do, because I've had a case where we've had the father and the child being removed from a plane at Heathrow, going to Dubai.
Oh, wow. So, okay. So in this scenario, wife says to ex-husband, I've had enough. I'm going home. I want to be with mum. She gets on the plane. The husband realizes this has happened. He's very het up about it. He phones his attorney. The attorney phones through to presumably the airlines.
Border control, airlines. Yep.
Oh my God, that must be pretty traumatic for the kids. They just on an 8-hour flight.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's an alert, and then they can. I mean, we were lucky they were on the plane, but they were escorted out. I mean, it was just unreal. But
it doesn't mean that the kids will never be able to go back home. It means that needs to be looked at, and there needs to be, court involvement as to what should happen.
But the reality is, you can't do it. You can't take unilateral action when it comes to leaving a country with one parent. You've got to.
But it's worth bearing in mind that not all countries are signed up to the Hague Convention. Countries that
dangerous.
aren't include India, UAE, Egypt. So in those situations where a child is taken there, it's far more difficult to get them back.
Which is why when we actually managed to get them off the plane, they were still in Heathrow.
Yeah.
The minute they would have taken off, it would have been extremely difficult.
Wow. Okay, we got loads of comments and questions coming in. I'm just going to pick some up. So let me just take a few. I'll just take these ones myself. So a comment from Lauren here. She said, talking about the documents you need to take with you when you get on a plane, a copy is okay, or should you take original documents?
I know the answer to this. Copies are okay.
Okay, that's an easy answer. Okay,
yes.
Cool. Other comments here. This is from Becky Woods. Becky's with ADP. She says, I've advised others to travel with a notarized permission letter from the other parent. Again, is that best advice?
Yes. I mean, the more official the documentation, the better. You can't go wrong with that.
And it just needs to say that they have permission to fly to be in a different country without the other parent.
Correct.
Okay, and a comment coming in here from Merrily. She said, I've had expats have to track down the baby mom for permission to go over. So I can't read the rest of that. So again, need to understand the relationship of each child going on.
Yeah, because I think it's to do with whoever has parental responsibility for the particular child. And in most cases, it's mother and father.
Right, got it.
Unless it's adopted, it can be
stepchildren.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let me just move on. Actually, have we got any other comments here? Let me just see some of these comments. Let's pull up a few more comments, Tally. Okay, so we've got one from Carlin. Let's just take that one. I went the extra mile to have my husband's surname in my passport for exactly this reason. And I recall the embassy doing a great job informing us of travel restrictions with one parent. Our daughter was born abroad when we first applied for her passport. Okay. So, and here, does the child citizenship play a role?
Not in divorce proceedings. When you're looking at, if you're talking to us as family law practitioners, and where what would be the right forum and the relevant jurisdiction, the child citizenship in that situation isn't relevant for that purpose.
Okay, so let's move on. There's so much to talk about here. We've talked about child abduction, and you've talked a bit about the Hague Convention. What about prenups? Okay, so some countries have prenups, other countries don't. Tell us a bit about, you make a prenup, you made it in your home country, and then you've moved to your host location. Is the prenup valid?
Yeah, I mean, Lara and I actually both do a lot of prenups.
Yeah.
It's an area of work that in England definitely has become increasingly popular. And it depends. If you do a prenup in England, certain conditions and criteria have to be satisfied. If it's a foreign prenup, we would look again at the laws of that country.
Yeah, and I mean, if you were looking at a foreign prenup and they've moved to England, the English courts would look at it in how the English law looks at prenups. So they look at the criteria, has that been met? Whereas in other countries, US, Europe, I don't think they have so much discretion as to whether or not that should be enforced.
Yeah, so in a lot of European countries, they're upheld per se. In England, unless and until you've done everything that you're meant to be doing, then it may not be upheld. But what we do, because I once did a prenup with a couple who had 4 relevant jurisdictions, and we did mirror agreements in every country, so that if they decided to proceed in any of those jurisdictions, they had exactly the same terms. They were covered. Yeah.
And we would then, in the same way we would in other areas, we would liaise with the lawyer in whatever country it was to ensure it was a mirror agreement, and then it would be upheld in each of the different jurisdictions.
So there was never going to be an issue in one of the other jurisdictions. But England does have very specific criteria that you need to comply with, and we always make sure that we do it in good time. So in England, particularly, the sooner you do the prenup, the better. You don't want to do it too near the wedding date.
Moving away from England, I'm well aware that a lot of our audience are not from the UK. How common are prenups around the world?
Very.
I see.
Yeah, they're common.
Very
Businesses have that concept, do they?
They are. I mean, around the world more than England, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the US they've been around for a lot longer.
Time.
Very, since they've been here. I'd say it was only the last, 20 years they've been becoming more common here. But the US goes much further back than that.
Yeah,
and same as Europe.
I find my European cases, there's a prenup.
Okay, and what about postnups? I hear about those.
Yes,
too.
I've been doing a lot of those recently. Interestingly enough, I think a lot of my sort of clients like to do a sort of belt and braces approach. They do a prenup and they also do a postnup in the same terms, so that it can never be said it wasn't done properly, etc.
Yeah, and things change. Children are born. People inherit, more assets are purchased, or so it's important to always review that prenup post marriage.
Yeah, we would always make sure there's a review clause, so that the circumstances at the time of entering the prenup are never going to be the same as 15 years down the line.
Okay,
so we want to make I
want to move on. We've got about 10 minutes left or so I want to move the conversation on. We've talked about, if you like, traditional marriages. I want to move on to other marriages, and here's what great question from Cheryl. She said, "Is it fair to state that the laws and scenarios are based on more traditional marriages? And can you tell us a bit about same-sex marriages and what the rules there might be?"
So again, our experience of same-sex marriages and same-sex divorces in England are that we've done quite a few of those separation and divorce, and they have the same rights as a heterosexual divorce.
There's no difference.
There's no difference in what they're entitled to.
No.
So their entitlement is exactly the same. But again, this is a country where we recognise same-sex marriages.
But of course, that isn't the case across the globe. Other countries don't recognise same-sex marriage, in which case, say you had someone who'd got married here and they moved from a country that didn't recognise the same-sex marriage, it wouldn't be recognised, let alone try to divorce there.
So they'd have to go back to the country where they actually got married, where it was recognised.
Yeah, what about, there might even be custody issues, because I know, and we've had people on the show before talking about same-sex marriages and children, and saying that in some countries they won't recognise the birth certificate if, for example, there's 2 fathers on the birth certificate and there's not a mother on the birth certificate. I don't know what would happen generally in custody situations where you've got same-sex families with two, say 1 or 2 kids.
But it would be exactly the same way of dealing with a dispute as you would do in terms of what's the relevant country that they should go to.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry, Darby just mentioned a really good point there. Sorry, I know we're talking about same-sex marriages, but you see, in these states, they're highly recommended. And now here, I think they're becoming highly recommended too. So I think, Brian, we're seeing a complete shift now. Whilst historically they were taboo, they're no longer.
Yeah, people always used to think that a prenup was like sort of the kiss of death.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But I'm always amazed now how the initial discussion I have with my prenup clients are relaxed. They've both spoken about it already by the time they've come to see me. And, you know, it's an easy discussion.
Yeah, it's just a bit of an insurance policy.
Yeah, to avoid protracted litigation at a later date.
Okay. So if you have, what advice would you give to the person that first walks into your office, and let's just say they are an expat coming into your office, and they're from, I don't know, let's just say they're from New York, and they walked into your office. What's the sort of the initial key advice you give them? Like if they had to take one thing home with them as like the golden nugget, what would that be?
Well, we'd explore what other jurisdictions would be relevant. So obviously there's New York, but where's his spouse from? Where, does he have any other domicile or nationality? We just have to explore the whole.
I mean, the key thing is that he wouldn't be able to sit and go home and have a think about it. I think he would need to act pretty quickly.
And that's stressful, but we do we act really quickly. And in fact, I've done an article, it's actually on LinkedIn about that. And the emphasis is, the nugget is, you need to act quickly. You need to speak to the foreign lawyers quickly. They need to liaise with us. And then we need to make that decision pretty quick, pretty prompt. That's the nugget.
Okay, so lots of interesting advice. I'll just pick up a comment here from Jeremy. He said, we had this experience with a same-sex couple that had adopted children, 2 mothers, relocating to an Asian location. Stonewall gave some great and insightful advice. Parents and children decided to relocate to another location. So, great point there from Jeremy, and thank you for sharing that. We're getting close to the end of time. I'm going to bring Julia and Julie back on. Here, Julia, I just want to, from an immigration perspective, I just want to get onto this question that we've been talking about earlier. We've got a couple that have split up, and the spouse wants to return home. The husband wants the kids to stay. How likely is it the spouse will be able to stay? Or is it the normal case that the visa sort of expires on separation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to say. I think Yael and Lara did such an amazing job there, because it just depends in every different country. So, but I mean, I've been involved in lots of cases where they can't stay. It really just depends on what the immigration rules are.
Yeah, it's true.
Presumably the authorities would never split up the parent from the children, would they? So I'm just thinking of a case where you've got 2 children, one of which has got the right to stay because maybe the child was born in the US, whereas the other may not have the right to stay because it was a European national. The courts wouldn't split up a family, would they? Not, or could they?
Well, I mean, there are situations where that would mean that the children would then have to leave the country too.
Yes.
So yes, there's those situations. If the person, they would.
And Lara, just for our last sort of 30 seconds or so, I want to ask sort of one question to you to give you the last word, because we talked about this earlier. You were the child of a family that split up when they were, and your dad became an expat. Now, was it, you were saying to me earlier, his policy from the company was very generous, and you were actually given free trips out to visit him when he was on assignment. So tell us a bit about that and what you would recommend in terms of having a good policy.
So my dad remained where he was assigned. I moved back to where I was from, and the company very kindly offered me, I think, 3 or 4 flights per year to go back and stay with him, which was fantastic. And I think that was a great policy.
That's generous. That's good.
Very generous.
Yeah, I think that's extraordinarily generous. I mean, you shared the name of the company with me. I know they've been a guest on, or they've been in the audience on our show. So I don't know if their policy is still the same. Obviously, yours was many years ago. But it's just interesting. So if you like, the tip that's coming, I know cost comes into from a corporate point of view, but the tip from you to corporates is please have a generous policy that looks after the children in an expatriate divorce situation. We are now out of time, so I'm going to bring back our producer and also Matt, so we all get a chance to say goodbye. It's been an amazing show today. We had 400 people watching us live. Next week, we've got another great show talking about artificial intelligence and how you can have global mobility superpowers. This has been The View from the Top. I've been your host, Brian Friedman. A big, big thank you to our regular guest, Julie Onslow-Cole, to Julie Barron, our wonderful producer, Tali Goran, to our Benivo representative, Matt Cheek, and a big, big, special thank you to our very special guests, Yael Selig and Lara Myers from Osbornes Law.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great, great week.
Thank you. Bye.